that we don't want you to describe that this happened, then this happened, then this happened. We want you to force us to think why it happened. What's the reasoning behind this? Not only that, but explain to us your thought process and what it is that you're doing. So that type of history writing, unfortunately, is predominantly dominated in the academic space. And so when I went into university to do history, I was the only Muslim there. And that was a concern for me. Now, I'll tell you something interesting, because I went to my community and asked them if they could support me in some shape or form. And people found it strange that to support somebody who wants to do history. We have a tradition of, in the modern period at least, putting money towards building infrastructure. So masajids, we will build madrasas, we will build wells, and so forth. But the idea of investing in people is somehow still missing in our collective sort of like habits. And yet the Quran is very clear on this. Okay? Supporting the traveller, supporting the orphans, supporting the student of knowledge, and so forth. And what you see is that in our ecosystem, people still need that support to be able to produce for the community. And one of the reasons why I'm saying this is because now there is an upturn towards more young Muslims who want to study history. And the reason why we study history is not necessarily because we want to be famous, but because the Ummah needs it. Young generation who are being attracted to various forms of fictional works, whether it's anime, and I watch anime so I understand it well, to Didelis Ottoman, which was a TV show, that's where they're taking their information from, right? Now, if you don't study history, you can become a little bit dislocated of what it means to belong to the Ummah. So I was in the United States of America and I asked some young students, what does it mean to belong to the Ummah? Give me what is part of the Ummah? And they went, Palestine. They said the Rohingya. They said the Uyghurs. Now this disappointed me a little bit, because the way that the next generation are internalizing the idea of the Ummah is that the Ummah are an oppressed people. And they only think of the collective in the framework of oppression. That's how they see it. Now I asked them the question, what about the Ummah of the past? And they went, oh yeah, the Ummah of the past. And why is it important to know about the Ummah of the past? And this was a little bit challenging for them, that we historians make this case, that the Ummah goes beyond time and space. Now once you understand that the Ummah came before you, and the Ummah is coming after you, and that it's not just a geographical location, but it's also time as well, then we start to realize that the Ummah as a concept, as an idea, as an identity perhaps, is a lot larger, right? A lot bigger. That's why history matters. That's why it's important, so that Muslims understand. Like in this country, when I was born and raised here, they gave us narratives of the Queen and Country. But it was very difficult for us to identify Queen and Country, the two great wars, the Victorians, the Tudors, the Romans. This was a challenge for me in terms of identifying with this type of history. Now, what happened to me also is I had no understanding of my history from the country where my parents were from, and I had no understanding of the history of the Islamic past. That level of dislocation is problematic, especially because it's part of our deen. Now, I've written a book recently about why Muslims should study history, and one of the points I make is that Muhammad Iqbal, who was a famous philosopher, thinker from the Asian subcontinent, he says in the Quran there are 3 ayahs, and he says that we translate ayat as verses, but in actuality it means signs, right? There's 3 ayahs in the Quran. Number 1, the ayats themselves. So each ayah in the Quran is a sign. You read it, you contemplate over it, you try to take meaning from it. These ayahs, each ayah can stand independent, alone, and you can take meaning from it. It doesn't it's linked to the ayah that comes before it and after it, and it doesn't contradict any other ayah in the Quran. That was one. The second thing he said, the rules of nature, or the cosmos, right? That He's got to send the seat. It's the boss man. You're the boss man.
Yeah.
He is now. The second thing is the ayats of the cosmos. Okay? That if insan looks at the cosmos around them, then they would understand the haqq of what it means to exist in this dunya. Because everything that Allah Ta'ala has created is an ayah for you to understand that Allah Ta'ala is the one who's created everything. This is standard. So Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran, look at the stars. Now unfortunately we can't see stars anymore because of the light pollution. So we become disconnected. Allah Ta'ala talks about mountains. And if the Quran had been given to a mountain, that, Allah Ta'ala talks about multiple things about looking in nature. And we don't do it because we're too busy looking at our phones to be able to see that if you just paid attention to the things around you, that they all point towards Allah Ta'ala. Now Iqbal says another thing, which is the third ayah is history. That history itself tells us, they close the curtains but it doesn't close the noise. It's what it is. The third ayah is history. The idea of history is this, is that Iqbal makes the argument that by learning from the human experience, and that what happened to people before, the Jama'at of Allah, the Qudrat of Allah, the will of Allah, these are all important things. Now what we're noticing today, unfortunately, is people are disconnected from the rules of the cosmos. So they don't look around them to pay attention to what's happening in the world. They're disconnected from the Quran to some degree. And they're disconnected from the collective human experience. So what happens is all you have left is the time you're living in now. And that's not healthy, right? So the reason why then history becomes important, which was a vocation that's been abandoned for a while, is because it helps us understand our place in the collective human timeline, right? Now I'm going to start off with a hadith today, because whenever I come to a masjid, I always try to teach a small hadith, because I think it's important, and we have kids here, and so on. And as Ramadan is coming next week, this hadith becomes even more important in relation to Ramadan in many ways. And it's the hadith where Rasulullah receives wahi via Jibreel alayhi salam, right? So the famous story of Surah Alaq in the Quran. Now what's unique about this event that happens, it happens in Ramadan. And not only does it happen in Ramadan, but it actually happens in Laylatul Qadr. We know this from many other hadiths that support this case. Now what's important here to understand perhaps is that Ramadan is not simply a month about fasting. It's more than that. Okay? So the idea of Laylatul Qadr being in Ramadan, meaning the night of power, it should tell you something. That this night of power existed before we even started the fast. Because this is an issue to do with the rules of the cosmos. And that Ramadan was important for the Muslims even before they started fasting. This is a month of the Quran, as we will see, because the Quran is revealed in the month of Ramadan. This is the month of taqwa. No doubt about it. Later on I'll explain to you guys how so many of the battles in Islam, like the Battle of Badr, happened during the month of Ramadan. And it's no surprise when Muslims went through these various moments in Ramadan that they were successful, because this is the month of taqwa. This is the month of tahajjud, where people wake up in the night to pray. And this is also important because we'll see some remnants of this in the hadith itself. So all of these things are important. Now, the reason why I'm going to mention this hadith a little bit also, because I'm writing a book at the moment on the relationship between Jibreel alayhi salam and Rasul sallam. The idea is that angels are part of Iman. Muslims should understand that and recognize that. And I've noticed that there are, for the younger generation, there are many books that are just missing for them. All right, so the hadith starts off with Bismillah. It's the Aisha anha. She says, the commencement of the divine inspiration, meaning to Allah's Messenger, Rasulullah, was in the form of true dreams in his sleep. For he never had a dream, but it turned out to be true and clear as the bright daylight. Now, one of the unique things about this hadith, as a historian, what you understand, is that Rasulullah chose to tell this and give this hadith to Aisha radiallahu anha. This is important. There's a reason for that, because she had an exceptionally sharp mind. She was young and so forth. So he gives this hadith to Aisha. Now what's also unique and beautiful about this hadith is it mentions Khadija radiallahu anha in it as well. So the two most important women to Rasulullah are actually linked to this hadith in some shape or form. This is important. But then she says that Rasulullah was receiving true dreams. Okay? True dreams. And then said, and they were clear as the bright daylight. This means he was not having the type of dreams that you and I have, where we have to interpret something. The dreams are clear to him. The reason why this is important is to understand this is because later, when I speak about Jibreel alayhi salam, and some people have created arguments of ambiguity, that Rasulullah thought this was jinn or so forth. In this hadith, you don't see any evidence of that. In fact, Rasulullah was aware that something is happening because he's having clear dreams. If you're getting clear dreams, you know something's taking place. This is not ambiguity now. This is not confusion. You have these dreams, and so what do you do as a result of these dreams? You prepare for that. This is what he's doing. So it's important to realize that, in some of the ulama, they say prior to these dreams, Rasulullah used to hear the trees and the stones say salam to him. Now this is also an interesting idea, because many of the Ottomans, when they were building masajids, they were apologizing to the stones as they were cutting them because of this idea, that the stones were saying salam to Rasulullah. So these stones are not just random things that we can just throw away. That there should be some ihtiram and respect to the fact of stones and trees in the way we behave with them. We see this in the Quran itself regarding jihad, not to just chop down trees. This is important, that the world that you're living in and the things that Allah Ta'ala has created, that there is a particular relationship with this, because technology today is making us believe we don't have to behave this way. These are just things. We can just throw them as we want. This is not how this works, right? So he's clearly having these dreams, and they're as clear as day. Clear as day. Now this idea of them being clear as day means, some ulama say it's like when the light starts to come from the day, the break of dawn, that you're starting to see some clarity. This is why Aisha radiallahu anha narrated that Rasulullah said they were clear as day. Other people make the idea that it's clear as day because the whole experience in the cave is an experience of being in the dark, and there are moments where we start to see the experience of light itself. So dreams are usually, you sleep, you close your eyes, and then the light is the clear as day. This is important, like I said. So then she says, then he, Rasulullah, began to like seclusion. So he used to go in seclusion in the cave of Hira, where he used to worship Allah continuously for many nights before going back to his family to take the necessary provisions for the stay. He started to go into seclusion, meaning he knew what was coming. He's preparing himself. Now when he's in seclusion, what's he doing? But there's no ibadat here. There's nothing telling us what type of ibadah he's doing. But the first type of ibadah he's doing is clearly the zikr of Allah Ta'ala. He's continuously remembering Allah Ta'ala. Now I told you that this hadith is not just about the hadith of the Quran. This is the hadith of Ramadan. What do we do in Ramadan? We do the zikr of Allah Ta'ala. So Rasulullah is going in the cave in Ramadan and he's remembering Allah Ta'ala. Now I lived in Tokyo, so when I was in Tokyo, a Japanese thinker said that today's generation, and the language he uses is different, but I'm going to make the adjustment, they are doing tasbih on the dopamine of the phone rather than their fingers that Allah Ta'ala has given them. That they are more in touch with their swipe, 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 swipe on the phone than the subhanallah, subhanallah, subhanallah on their fingers. You see here that the technology, in many ways, they've become these hands of theirs, and I did this experiment in my school, by the way, so I told the kids to close their eyes, put their hands on the table, and put their phone next to them and don't open your eyes. And I want to see who cannot touch the phone the longest. Then I did the same, but then I picked up my phone. And they opened their eyes, they saw I picked up my phone, and they went for their phone. The phone has become an extension of their hand. But it's not only an extension of the hand, it's become an extension of the mind and the soul. This is dangerous. This is why seclusion is important. To disconnect you from the chaos of the world around you. Now here, unfortunately, we've brought the chaos into the home, the phone. So the seclusion would have to be that you need to figure out a way in Ramadan to put your phone away. The phone is going to have to go somewhere, because otherwise that contraption is going to take away from you. So he goes into this stage of seclusion in the cave. Now, he's not only then doing adhkar, he's also reflecting. Another important form of ibadat. To ask yourself, why am I here? What's my purpose? What's my goal? What are we doing here as Muslims? What is my connection with Allah Ta'ala? What is important in this month? What is the idea of my soul? This type of introspection is very clear in the Islamic tradition. Now, I went to a Western university. One of the things we learn is critical thinking. So critical thinking is giving us this idea of being arrogant, but we always want to debate and argue with people. Convince me, prove to me, and so forth. But Islam moves beyond this idea of critical thinking. It then asks you, okay, there's one thing criticizing other people, but did you look inside? Did you reflect inside? This is why the ayats in the Quran become important, because you do tafakkur and tadabbur. Tafakkur is to reflect on the ayah. So today, perhaps, after you leave, you might say, this guy came from London, kind of strange, but I want to reflect on what he's saying, whether I agree or disagree. But tadabbur is when you do that over a prolonged period of time. You're thinking about something for a long time. This is what Rasulullah is doing in the cave. He's thinking for a long time. Now, what's he thinking about? We don't know. What are the dreams about? We don't know. But maybe we do. Maybe the idea comes in the hadith later. Now, he goes to the cave of Hira. So we know where he's going. He's going to a place of seclusion. Now, the cave of Hira is really unique. So if anyone's been, it's not very big, by the way. So imagine he's in a small cave and he's gone into it. And the reason why Rasulullah was going to the cave of Hira is because he wanted to be away from the chaos of Makkah. But some of the ulama say he could see the Kaaba from the cave. So if any of you have been to Hira, you can actually see it. Now you see a giant clock tower too. But you were able to see it in the olden days, the Kaaba directly, which is telling us what? He wanted to be away from the dunya, but he didn't want to be away from the Kaaba. He understood this. So he's going in the cave, he's doing his zikr, he's doing his contemplation, and from time to time he'll look out and he'll see the Kaaba get more strength backwards and forwards. This is what he's doing here. So we learn something here again, that this hadith is telling us that Ramadan is also the month of the Kaaba. Okay, and people will go to Umrah and so forth. We pray Salah in the direction of the Kaaba and so on. And this becomes a really important point here. And so Rasulullah, he knows what he's doing. Now, he's going to his wife Khadija, so we do etikaf, okay? But in some traditions, you are given the permission that when you're in etikaf, you can go out quickly, pick up some food and come back. And so Rasulullah, to some degree, because I said this is the hadith of Ramadan, he's in the cave doing etikaf. But then he'll quickly go to his wife, Khadija al-Anha, take some provisions and come back. But the hadith talks about provisions. He's not bringing a big meal. He's not feasting in the cave. He's probably got a couple of dates here, some olives, a little bit of milk perhaps, but even that's difficult to take up. And he's usually eating small bits. Why? Because Imam Ghazali rahimahullah says that when the body is at its weakest point, the soul is at its highest point. Right? This is an important idea because in Ramadan, we don't fast to learn how to be because of the poor people around the world. If that was the case, then Allah Ta'ala would tell the poor people not to fast. They too have to fast. We fast for Allah Ta'ala because it increases your taqwa. That's why we fast. That everyone fasts because it increases your taqwa, because your body becomes weaker and your spirit becomes greater. Because you're not pumping it with food and having relations and so forth. This is important. So once again, even though Rasulullah is not fasting here, this is probably giving us an indication that he's still doing some type of practice which is close to that form of ibadat. So already we're learning that in actuality Rasulullah is exercising many of the things that we do in Ramadan already in this month, in that sense. And then she says, okay. He says, till one day he received the guidance while he was in the cave of Hira. An angel came to him and asked him, Iqra. Okay. This is beautiful. All right. Now, she says an angel came to him. An angel came to him. How do we know it's an angel? Because she responds and replies to that, but there's no indication in this hadith that Rasulullah thought it was a jinn. There's nothing in this hadith that indicates that. Now, I told you that Rasulullah is having clear dreams, clear visions. The ulama talk about even lights in the sky were going off and the trees are giving salam and so forth. He knows something's happening. So he's aware that it's not a jinn that's visiting him in the cave. It's an angel. Now, one of the things about the angel is he says, Iqra. And we assume that Iqra here means to read. What does it mean to read? Because if you say Iqra to someone, what's the answer going to be? Read what? They said read something. You say, well, what do I read? Well, give me something to read. That's not what Rasulullah says. He doesn't say read what exactly, but he tries to find an excuse by making the answer. He says, I do not know how to read. Now, what's interesting in the Arabic, it could mean I do not know how to recite, or I'm not a reciter. Right? This is important here. It makes more sense if someone says Iqra, recite, and you say, I don't do that. Now, what's unique here is then Rasulullah says, and then he was squeezed. Okay? He was squeezed. Now, when I said this to my students, then how did Jibreel alayhi salam squeeze Rasulullah? One of them went like this. And I said, why do you think that happened? I said, that's how you squeeze someone, teacher. I said, but does in the hadith say that Jibreel alayhi salam came as a man? Hadith doesn't mention that. It doesn't say Jibreel alayhi salam came in a human form and squeezed me. Because if it was a human form, he came in the cave, then Rasulullah asked, who are you in the cave? Because he'd think he's a man. What are you doing here? I'm contemplating, what's your business? Why are you trying to squeeze me? There would have been a struggle. We don't see any of this in the hadith. It doesn't mention that. It just mentions that the angel said to me, Iqra. I responded with a negation, and then I felt a squeeze. What some of the ulama say is that this word also means to envelope someone, to consume them. Okay? What's possible, imagine then, that you're in a cave and you can't see a human being, there's an angel, and he consumes you. Because Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran that Jibreel alayhi salam is indeed the spirit. And then Allah Ta'ala mentions in the Quran that the Quran came into Rasulullah's heart. What's happening here perhaps is that Jibreel alayhi salam is holding Rasulullah to prepare him for the Quran. In actuality, he's not testing him, read. He's actually getting ready to recite the surah perhaps. Iqra, Iqra, Iqra bismi rabbika allazi khalaq. This is how we learn Quran, by the way. Whenever we learn Quran, it was like, Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. We get the intro first, and then the Quran is recited. Because if he recited the whole surah in one go, it would be totally confusing. So he started with the first word to prepare Rasulullah for the Quran. Okay. Now this consuming is really interesting, because we see this somewhere else in another Anbiya story. Yunus alayhi salam. When Yunus alayhi salam is swallowed by the whale, there are 3 layers of darkness. There's the darkness of the night, to the darkness of the sea, to the darkness of the stomach of the whale. And it's then that Allah Ta'ala responds to him. Here we see the darkness of the night. How do we know it's night? Because it's Laylatul Qadr. To the darkness of the cave, to Jibreel alayhi salam consuming him, and then telling him, Iqra. These are important experiences here that Rasulullah is going through. This is happening in the month of Ramadan. And I want to explain it to you this way so that you understand the sort of like weight of what's taking place here. Now Allah Ta'ala mentions in the Quran that the Quran is heavy. It's heavy on him. So imagine the Quran is going in him. Because here what's interesting is he mentions that Jibreel alayhi salam recites the ayahs of the Quran, but how does he recite them? It doesn't say that he shouted them. He didn't say, Iqra. We don't get that impression. But because Iqra is an imperative form, there's an assumption it's a command, but it could have been, Iqra bismi rabbika allazi khalaq. It could have been in the cave. It could have, why not? And the Quran is wahi, so why not? But these experiences are important to understand then, how the Rasul is engaging with the introduction of the Quran. Now what does Allah Ta'ala say now? He says, Iqra bismi rabbika allazi khalaq, khalaqal insana min alaq. Okay, now this is beautiful. Why? Because Allah Ta'ala is not mentioning Adam alayhi salam. He's telling Rasul that I am your Rabb, meaning Rasul is thinking about who's my Lord, because he's getting these dreams. He has an understanding. He's doing zikr of Allah Ta'ala. He's aware of the haqq. But then Allah Ta'ala tells him that I created insan from a clot. This is not a science explanation for Rasul. He doesn't need that. But he's telling him, he's reminding him that I am the creator of all things. Because he mentions it, that I am the creator. So he's told Rasul now, he's answered the question that I created everything in this cosmos. Your Rabb, me, Allah, has created everything. And I even created you in the most humblest forms and the most blessed form. You were like this, a clot. And this is really interesting, because when you're in your mother's womb in that stage, and then when you are born, you enter the dunya, you don't return back to that stage. Rasul didn't return back to the cave of Hira after this incident. Once he left, that was it. The da'wah began. There are many analogies here when you read the hadith properly, because people just read hadith like line upon line upon line. These types of hadith are not designed for that. They're designed for the ulama to explain to you, because people understood these terminologies and the sort of like concepts. Words are concepts. And it's important to understand that. Okay, then Allah Ta'ala says, Ikra wa rabbuka al-akram allazi allama bil kalam. And this is beautiful, because Allah Ta'ala on the one hand says, I created insan from a clot, and then I elevated you by teaching you knowledge, by teaching you by the pen. What made you insan so important is I took you from here and I put you over here. And imagine Jibreel alayhi salam is saying this to Rasul sallam, and he's reciting the insan, and he's the angel. He's the master angel. If you saw Jibreel alayhi salam today in his actual state, you would collapse out of fear. And he's reciting the ayahs of the Quran in front of the messenger, Rasul sallam, that insan was like this, and then insan became this. This is what you are. You're amazing. And this is what Rasul sallam is thinking about in the cave. Allah Ta'ala is talking to him directly. So these ayats are not just for us to read. He's also speaking to Rasul Sallam. So when we were saying, what was Rasul Sallam thinking about? What were the dreams about? About this, probably, to help him understand. He's addressing it now directly. And this tells us that the importance of insan is that Allah Ta'ala has given us free will. No other creature or creation has that. Insan has it. Free will. And we need to exercise it. And what Allah Ta'ala tells us then is that knowledge is what makes people elevated. Your ilm and your amal is what makes you elevated, makes you different. And this has already been said here in the Quran. And this is what Rasul Sallam is probably thinking about. So then, Aisha radiallahu anha, she then says, the Messenger of Allah Ta'ala, Rasul Sallam, returned with the experience. And the muscles between his neck and shoulders were trembling till he came upon Khadija radiallahu anha and asked her, cover me. Zambiloni, cover me. Now, what does this mean? Now, this is interesting because he came. If anyone's been to Hira, to Makkah, that's a long walk. He's had time to walk down the cave and all the way to Makkah. He's had time to think about his experience. He's had time to digest what's happened to him. And then he comes to her and he says, cover me. Because the Quran has entered his heart and he needs to feel this. But what's unique about this as well is that the next couple of surahs that are revealed in the Quran after, one of them is Surah Muzammil. And Allah Ta'ala in Surah Muzammil talks about salah in the night. Tahajjud. So this covering is an indication of the need of those who are pious to pray in the night. I see my mum doing it a lot. She does it a lot more than me. And it's amazing because when my mum was younger, when I was a young child, she wasn't doing it. And as she's got older, she's waking up in the middle of the night to do tahajjud. It's amazing. And Rasul Sallam did it all the time. All the time. I mentioned to you about dreams. The sunnah of Rasul Sallam, every Salat al-Fajr, he would ask people, what dream did you have today? This is something we don't practice anymore. But he asked them continuously, did anyone have a dream today? Let me hear it. And so on. And dreams are important because they are a form of wahi. Okay? So, he then goes to Khadija and she covers him. And radiallahu anha. And then, he says, in his state of fear, he says to Khadija, oh Khadija, what is wrong with me? I was afraid that something bad might happen to me. And then he told her the story. He explained to her. Okay. And then she says, nay, but receive good tidings. By Allah, Allah will never disgrace you. For by Allah, you keep good relations with your kith, meaning your family, and kin. You speak the haqq. You help the poor and the destitute. You entertain your guests generously. And you assist those who are stricken with calamities. Firstly, what's beautiful here is that she has no doubt in her mind. Why? Because the signs that he's seeing, he's already told her. I'm having these dreams. This is what's happening. I'm going through these experiences. So she's aware, just like he is aware, that he's special. And he's had experiences throughout his whole life. So when he mentions this to her, she's not shocked by it. She doesn't look at it and go, oh, well, I don't know. My husband's a bit strange. She goes, of course. Of course. But then what does she say? She doesn't say because Allah, she goes, by Allah, Allah will not disgrace you because you don't pray. That's not what she says. She says, Allah will not disgrace you because you're good to your family. She talks about his actions, his behavior with people. She goes, you're good to your family. You speak the haqq. Because you help the poor and the desolate. You entertain your guests generously. And you assist those who are stricken with calamities. She spoke specifically about his behavior. And this is important. Because when you read the Quran more generously, you'll see that when Allah Ta'ala mentions the Anbiya, He doesn't give us the details of the ibadat. He tells us what they do, how they behave with people, their moral values, their standards. We know that they have to worship Allah Ta'ala, and that's why we're here. We understand that. And that is something that we can do. But somehow, or sometimes, we forget that being a good Muslim is also your behavior with other people. And Khadija radiallahu anha is saying this in this hadith. And this is important because in the month of Ramadan, we're speaking about Ramadan again, these behaviors are expected from us twice as much. In the Ottoman Empire, when Ramadan used to come, they used to tell the businessmen or the sellers to lower their prices in this month. Make the food more affordable for people because it's Ramadan. That's unheard of today. I mean, maybe in Christmas they give you some sort of like deal in this country, but that's not for free. But here, they're telling all the Muslims to make it easy for the Muslims because Allah Ta'ala will reward you with ajr instead. So whatever prices you're charging, so it makes the whole Ramadan experience very different. Everyone is this mode of generosity and so forth. And here, she mentions that you are generous to people. Generosity is an act we have to do in Ramadan with the Sadaqah and the Zakat. But not just generous with your money. No. Are you generous with your time? Time is the hardest thing to be generous with. It's very difficult to give people your time. Give people your time in this month. Don't be stingy with it. I remember one time I was in Aqsa with my friend, and it was Ramadan. And a friend of mine who's Palestinian, he invited us to his house for iftar. And my friend said to me, "Oh, but we should pray at Aqsa because we get more reward." I said, "We've been invited for someone's house for iftar. We should go. It's an invitation." And I understood the mindset. But what I was trying to explain is the barakah you get for being and giving people your time is also important. It's a form of worship in many ways. And we went and the family were excited and they fed us and they took care of us. And then we went to pray Taraweeh in Aqsa. It was amazing. And so give people your time. Time is an interesting thing. In this country, they take it away from you very quickly. You're working all the time, and that's where your time has gone. And then we try to squeeze in ibadat and squeeze in the time with our family and friends and so forth. This is not why Allah Ta'ala created us to do that. This is not why we're here. Okay? All right, then he goes on. She says, Khadija then took him to Waraqah bin Nawfal, the son of Khadija's paternal uncle. Waraqah had been converted to Christianity in the pre-Islamic period and used to write Arabic and write the gospel in Arabic as much as Allah wished him to write. He was an old man and had lost his eyesight. This is an interesting point. He lost his eyesight. So his name is Waraqah, meaning he's somebody who's learned, for sure. But he's lost his eyesight. And then he says, he goes to Rasulullah and he says to me, "Oh, my cousin, listen to what your nephew is going to say." So Khadija says, and Waraqah says, "Oh, my nephew, what have you seen?" The Prophet then describes whatever he had seen. Now, this word, seen, is not actually he's asking, what have you seen? What do you see in a cave? It's dark. You don't see anything in a cave. That's not what Waraqah is asking him. People assume because Waraqah is blind, he's asking Rasulullah, what did you see in the cave? That's not what he's saying. He's saying, what did you experience? What did you feel when you were there? What happened? And then Rasulullah describes it to him. The reason why this is important is because we've become too accustomed that the ayats of Allah Ta'ala only can be seen. That this is the only sense we use as a way of getting close to Allah Ta'ala. This is why we're addicted to our phones. Because we're just using our sight to see. Waraqah is not seeing anything. He can only hear Rasulullah. And he says to Rasulullah, describe to me your experience. And Rasulullah describes the experience and then he recites the Quran to him. And Waraqah responds by saying, This is the same angel who was sent to Musa alayhi salam when he was young, meaning Jibreel alayhi salam. Waraka understood by the experience of Rasul sallam and by listening to the Quran that he is indeed a prophet. Now what's important here is you understand the Quran is not a miracle for your eyes, it's a miracle for the ears. The Iqra doesn't only mean to read and to recite, it means to understand with full comprehension. The word Iqra, with the root words, qara'a, is the name of the Quran itself. The Quran has taken its name from the first word that was revealed to Rasul sallam, to humanity. The Quran is a book you read, the Quran is a kitab you recite, and the Quran is a kitab you must understand with comprehension. This is why each ayah is designed for reflection. And he understood it. He's blind. He hears it. He knows. He knows what it is. This is why the Quran is amazing. Why? I'm a writer. When I write, I can never write in perfect grammar. I have to do drafts and edits and over. There's not a single human being who's written something in perfect grammar. Here, Rasulullah is reciting perfect grammar in speech. Impossible. It's impossible to do it. And Waraka is hearing this and he's realizing, okay, this is special. This is why it's important to understand why Waraka is blind. Not because he's asking Rasul sallam as a blind man, what did he see in the cave? But because he heard the Quran with his ears and he understood this was wahi. This was wahi. I remember when I was in Egypt, there was a Qari in Egypt teaching people Quran. He was blind. He was amazing. And for the first time when I'd seen it, I couldn't believe it. That he was teaching everyone Quran and he was blind. Because you don't need your eyes to see the Quran. You hear it and you memorize it. In fact, those of us who are from the Asian subcontinent, people laugh at us because we have this rocking motion when we're learning Quran. Because actually we're learning from the listening itself rather than the Mus'haf. The Mus'haf is interesting as well, only started to become popular in the 20th century because of the printed press. Prior to that, not many people had Mus'hafs because you had to write it by hand. And so specific people, like people of power or the ulama, had Mus'hafs. By and large, people would write ayahs of the Quran on a chalkboard and wipe it away. In the Ottoman Empire, you'll see two traditions. One is that after every salah, the imam will recite an ayah from the Quran for the community. Because for most people, that was one of the few times they would engage with the Quran. Because they were so busy working, they didn't even have time to read it. They'll pray salah, and then after salah, somebody would sit, and for 10 minutes at least, they would recite Quran, and everybody stayed. Listened to the Quran, and then went home. I think it's an important tradition. I think we should do that in our masajids more. The second thing that the Turks do, and this is from the Ottoman Empire, they call it muqabala. So they'll have two people in Ramadan, people come into the masjid and they would recite Quran. Then one reciter would recite some ayats and then the other reciter would recite other ayats, and this is a known tradition in the month of Ramadan. That happens in Turkey and in parts of Bilad al-Sham, and this is from the days of the Ottoman Empire. And they took it from the fact that Jibreel alayhi salam in the month of Ramadan used to come at the night and teach Rasul sallam the Quran. And then the Sahaba with their family in their homes used to do muqabala of memorizing Quran. It's a more interesting way of doing memorization. It doesn't feel like monotonous. You recite something, then someone recites it back. Then you recite it, then they recite it back. And there's the two of you helping each other, doing it. This is an important tradition in that context, right? Then he says that this is the name of angel, and he says, I wish I were young, he added. And then Rasulullah says, will people drive me out? And Waraka says, yes, for nobody bought the like of what you have bought, but was treated with hostility. He's given him a warning. In fact, Waraka is basically saying, I'm taking shahada, I get it. You're a prophet, I get it. And then he says, if I were to remain alive till your day, No, yeah, if I was to remain alive till your day, then I would support you strongly. And then in the hadith, Aisha radiallahu anha says, but a short while later, Waraqah died. And the divine inspiration was paused for a while, so that Allah's Messenger was very much grieved. Now here is interesting as well, that even here it's mentioned that Waraqah bin Nawfal died. Why is this important? It's important because if he were alive, then people would have accused Rasulullah of taking the Quran from Waraqah. They couldn't make that accusation because he died. So it could be from nobody else but from Allah Ta'ala. In this context. And this whole hadith, like I said, is a hadith of Ramadan. Okay? And it's a beautiful hadith that talks about not just Ramadan, but the various forms of ibadat. From Rasulullah looking at the Kaaba, to him doing, going in seclusion in the cave, to him reciting the Quran, to Jibreel alayhi salam visiting him, to him taking provisions, like he's fasting, to being covered, and so on. There's so much here that this hadith tells you. And the reason why I'm explaining this to you is because in the past, many of the ulama were historians. They were historians. They understood how to break down these hadith, to explain it to people so that they may understand. Because if you just took the hadith for bare bones, you're just reading words. But this is why then the ulama would explain this. And we don't do history anymore. Anyway, this was me, like I said, just explaining to you a little bit about the hadith, because it's something I'm working on right now, because the relationship between Jibreel alayhi salam and Rasulullah is very unique. It's very rare to write a history about a human being who has a relationship with an angel. And yet angels are part of Iman in many ways. And people feel nervous about that. Now, in the month of Ramadan, I already mentioned to you that this is the month of taqwa, right? And we can see then in this month of taqwa the achievements that many Muslims had. One of them is the Battle of Badr. It was during the Ramadan that the Battle of Badr actually commences. Now, people assume on many occasions that, the Muslims are not fasting in Ramadan because the fasting ahkam haven't come yet. It's just like another month. Nope. It's a special month for them. They're aware. They're still doing particular practices in this month. And so on. And then what's unique is in the Battle of Badr, we know the angels themselves come to help Rasulullah. And not only that, during the Battle of Badr or before it, Rasulullah has true dreams. He has dreams during the month of Ramadan. And it's very interesting that when I used to live in Bilad al-Sham, that many ulama in Bilad al-Sham, they used to talk about people having dreams during the month of Ramadan. Because especially in Laylatul Qadr and so on. We have Fath al-Makkah. Happens in Ramadan. Again, another key moment of high taqwa and so on. We have the capture of Toledo in Ramadan. We have the Battle of Hittin. And Salah-ad-Din defeats the Crusaders. He defeats them in Ramadan. We have the Battle of Ain Jalut, when the Muslims defeat the Mongols in Ramadan. And the siege of Constantinople, Istanbul, happened in Ramadan. It tells you something about this month in terms of how it motivates Muslims to achieve certain things. Now, I'm not going to take up too much of your time because you guys have been really generous with me. And I can see the cameraman, he's losing it. I'm losing him. Are you awake? Yeah. Alhamdulillah. I want to talk a little bit about the Ramadan traditions in the Ottoman Empire, because I'm an Ottoman historian, and this is one of the things that I think is important. Now, when I teach Ottoman history, I don't teach Ottoman history with a particular bias. That's not why I did it. I decided to teach Ottoman history because I believe Muslims should study all of their history. Muslims are not perfect. I know that. I study the history. And I've been teaching history now for between 12 to 15 years in Turkey. I didn't only teach Ottoman history. I taught the Khulafa Rashidun, the Umayyads, so the Umayyads, the Abbasids, the Seljuks, and the Ottoman Empire, some Islam in Spain, and some Muslims in India. It's a shame because I do believe that there should be more history about Muslims in Africa and Muslims in China. The Ummah is everywhere, but I'm deficient in that way. That's my failure. But Ottoman history was important because 600 years of history, not in the Muslim imagination, is a problem. That blind spot, right? And there's a lot of politics around, the Ottomans, how people feel about the Ottomans. I don't have that attachment. I just want you to learn all of your history about the Ummah, all of it, so that you're better informed. And so the early Ottomans, Ramadan was really interesting because today we still compete about moon sighting, but there was competitions about moon sighting even in the Ottoman Empire because there's no centralized state. So if you sighted the moon in Istanbul, they would leave it up to the people of Konya to sight the moon when they see it, or the people of Damascus to sight the moon. Moon sighting was very local in the Ottoman Empire because there's no telephone where you can tell someone, or the internet, that today Istanbul has seen the moon. To travel from Istanbul to Damascus could take a day and a half. It's too late by now. So they left it to local moon sighting. And so what we see is even in those moments that often the local moon sighting becomes an important practice because they want the local people to have some level of agency. Now they did have a majlis. Each community had their own sort of like shura, and it was based on sight and so on. Now this is important, I guess, because one of the things that we learn about ibadat, and I mentioned this, is it's attached to the rules of the cosmos. What do I mean by that? If you want to know what day is in the Islamic calendar, you look at the moon. You go outside and you see the moon, and you say, okay, today is the 15th of Shaban. Today is the 1st of Ramadan. Today, we only look at the moon for calendar in Ramadan, for Ramadan, that's it. But Muslims throughout their history were looking at the moon every day and say, today is such and such day. Because the evolutions of the moon tell you. So you don't need a calendar, actually. You can look at the moon. Salah, people knew what time it was because of the sun. So when the moon is rising, they know, okay, it's time for Salat al-Fajr is about to end. When the sun is going down, okay, this is time for Salat al-Maghrib. For the Hanafis, if your shadow is twice your length, okay, that's the time for Salat al-Asr, right? And so on. I remember with my mum, it was Ramadan a few years ago, and the time of suhoor was ending, so Islam channel, I was watching Islam channel. The muazzin went off, and I stopped everything, and my mum's still drinking her tea. I said, what are you doing? Like the muazzin. And she goes, opens the curtain, looks outside, closes it. I still got a few minutes. Now she understood, sounds strange, she understood the fiqh better than me. Because even in where we live in London, it's still a few minutes away from where it's been broadcasted in central London. We had that extra 1 or 2 minutes, and she learned it like this. My mum used to tell my sister and I, get home before it gets dark. She never said a time. She said, by the time it gets dark, come home. And this is important because what you realize then is that in Islam, like the way that we interact with the rules of the cosmos. The names of Salah are not the names of the Salah. They're names of time. The muazzin is the person who tells you the time. I know this because when I lived in Muslim countries, I don't wear a watch. Now I have to use my phone and check what time it is for Salah. I didn't need to worry about that in Syria and in Turkey and in Malaysia. I was just walking down the street, I heard the muazzin, I said, it's this time. The muazzin is a time teller. This is important to understand how ibadat and time are linked together. Why? Because in Islam, time is cyclical. It's not a straight line. It's not a straight line. When the clock came in the Ottoman Empire, it not only changed the way we told the time, because before we were looking at the sun and the moon, now we're looking at a device like that wall, the clock. But it changed our perception of time. Before we would say to people, I'll meet you after Salat al-Maghrib. Now we're telling people, I'll meet you at 5 o'clock. We turn time into units. But time in Islam is not units. Understand this. And I'll explain to you in a second why I'm giving you this long lecture on this. Today, we don't even have, the clock at least goes round and round. Today we're using a digital clock. It's saying 1636. How much time do I have, by the way? Turn your head. Yeah, a few minutes, all right. So, what this has done is it's broken time down into small units. Into small units. And we've become so narrow in this. But in Islam, time is not like this. Why am I saying this? Because Allah Ta'ala, one of His names is He's the one who brings something forward. He's the accelerator. He accelerates time. How do I know? My father, he's become very sick recently. When I used to see him before, he was fit and healthy. And then rapidly, you can have a sell-by date on food. One day it's fine. Second day it's fine. Third day rapidly declines. When you look around you, all these signs tell you that time is not 1, 2, 3. It's actually malleable. Sometimes it speeds up, things in this dunya. Sometimes they slow down. This is why the ibadat and so forth are attached to this way of understanding yourself in terms of time. But what we've done is we've got caught up in this and we've moved away from the time of the Islamic perspective. Why is this important? It's important because your time should be given to Allah Ta'ala. And in this month of Ramadan, those nights, long nights that we've been given here, use them wisely. Allah Ta'ala here is elongated the nights and shortened the days so it's easy for us to fast. This is an important moment. And in the Ottoman Empire, they did this a lot. One of the things that they did in the Ottoman Empire is they had open houses for iftar. So during the iftar, rich people, if you didn't have food, you could just walk in someone's house and eat. They wouldn't ask you, who are you? What are you doing here? I've seen this in Malaysia. They do it for Eid. In Eid, it's called open house. You walk down the street and there's people, they've got tables outside with food. And I remember I was in the village in the north of Malaysia and I was just walking into people's homes. I was thinking, oh man, they must think, who's this Pakistani guy walking? They didn't care. They said, oh yes, come brother, eat, go. This was a culture, this was a tradition in many parts of the Muslim world. The Ottomans were doing this, which I think is an important point. Another point that the Ottomans had was they would decorate their masjids for the month of Ramadan. In the Ottoman Empire, they have mahia, which is, they put lights, so that if anyone's been to Istanbul, lights between the two minarets, so that people from afar can see the message that there is written on the lights. So sometimes it will just be like, like, welcome the month of Ramadan. Or it will say that Allah is one, or whatever, and people would see this. In the olden days, there were candles, or something bright that had like that. Today they use bulbs and so forth. It's a wonderful tradition, but this idea of decorating the month, especially for the month of Ramadan, is a wonderful tradition because when children come during Taraweeh and so forth, they understand something unique and special is happening in this month, not just in the home. This is the house of Allah Ta'ala. So these are many of the things that the Ottomans were doing, which they still do in Turkey today. And as I mentioned to you before, the recitation of the Quran is important. In the Ottoman Empire, fundamentally what they believed, what made the masjid, was calligraphy in the masjid. As I told you, the Mus'haf is modern. We have copies of the Mus'haf today because we can print. But in the olden days, people didn't have those choices. So they would come to the masjid to listen to the Quran and to see the Quran written on the masjid. So they would engage. These ayahs of the Quran in the masjids in the Muslim world are not just for decoration. This is a very European idea. Get a bit of calligraphy, put it in a frame, stick it on the wall. That's not how this is in Islam. In Islam, when people came, they saw these ayats, they understood what it meant. They were glorifying Allah Ta'ala and so forth. And these are wonderful traditions that we can take in many ways. And sometimes living in the West, we forget these things. We forget. Someone asked me, what's the point of all this Islamic history? This is the point. Because we don't still have a long history in this country, right? When my dad came to Turkey to visit me, this is my last point, I promise. He shook me for Salat al-Fajr. He goes, wake up, wake up. I said, well, what's going on? He goes, listen to the azan. I said, yeah, he does that. And then he goes, no, you don't understand. I haven't heard this for 20 years. And I said, oh, that's right. Because I lived in Turkey. I live in the Muslim world. I'm hearing the muezzin every day. So for me, it's normal. But for him, he hadn't heard it for 20 days, that he woke me up for Salat al-Fajr to hear it, penetrating the sound waves. This is important. So What you see, and what the point I'm trying to make for you, perhaps during the month of Ramadan in particular, is I want you to understand, I guess holistically, what I was trying to do. This month is just not about fasting and eating. Okay, this is not just about how much food I can eat at iftar and so on. This month is more than that. And use this month wisely. I pray to Allah Ta'ala that He gives us the permission to enter the month of Ramadan. And I ask Allah Ta'ala that during the month of Ramadan, He allows us to get close to Him in the many ways that He can give us permission to do that. I pray to Allah Ta'ala that you have a wonderful month of Ramadan, that He forgives us all for the mistakes we have made. This month of Ramadan should be a month of reflection. The world is changing very fast. I pray to Allah Ta'ala during this month of Ramadan that when we leave it, that He gives us protection, inshallah. And I pray that in this month of Ramadan, that He brings the angels into this masjid and elevates its status, inshallah. Thank you so much for having me. It's not often I get the opportunity to do this. I really am grateful that the community has allowed me to come to Northampton and share some of my thoughts and ideas. So thank you so much for being patient. And Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.